In this lesson, we're going to go deeper into mechanical hand rigging, and we're going to learn some new things about Duick-Basel along the way. For most of these demos, we're going to be looking at big, kind of giant, blown-up, close-up hands. We're doing this for two reasons. For one thing, motion designers have to deal with hand close-ups all the time, especially in things like explainer videos and commercials where you have a hand operating a device or a keyboard, demonstrating some type of gadget, anything like that. The other reason is that it's just a little easier to demonstrate some of these more complicated rigs on a little bit of a larger piece of art. But I want to make something extremely clear, and this is super important, and we'll look at a couple of examples later to kind of reinforce this. Every kind of rig that I'm showing you, regardless of whether I'm showing it on one of these big giant hands or not, could be used on a full body rig. So just because we're showing a kind of disembodied hand here doesn't mean that you couldn't build any one of these rigs into a complete body with the hand off the end of the arm. I think in a lot of cases, the replacement rig we looked at is going to be your most common choice for full body rigs. So the idea of doing a more elaborate mechanical rig for a close-up hand is probably something that you're going to see a little more often when you're in close on the hand and you need to see the hand pushing buttons or twiddling a knob or operating a cell phone or something. Then you're going to really need that fine-tuned control over each finger in a way that you don't often need with a full body rig. But it's all about what the character has to do, the design of the character, and any hand rigging system can be used in any situation, either in a close-up or off the end of an arm in a full body rig. So just keep that in mind. We're looking at options that can be used in any context. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at here is going to be a jointed rig in terms of how we attach the artwork to the structure. The structure, of course, will be kind of more universal, just like what we looked at with the arms. But let's just take a minute and kind of note our situation with the artwork here. We have the circular marker guides to show us where our joints are. We've got a separate piece of art for the palm. And then we've got for the three fingers here, we've got two-part fingers. Now, a real human finger has three joints. The joint at the knuckle where the finger attaches, the large joint just below that right in the middle of the finger, and then a smaller joint right at the end separating the tip of the finger. But if you bend your fingers around a little bit, you'll see that most of the bending is happening at the knuckle and at that second joint just after the knuckle, and that third joint right at the tip of the finger doesn't really do a whole lot. So because of that, especially with more abstracted, more stylized characters, you can certainly get away with simply two-piece fingers, with a joint at the knuckle and then a joint below the knuckle to bend the rest of the finger. Now, on this particular set of artwork, we do actually have a three-part thumb. So we have the tip, the middle, and then the base of the thumb. And so we'll look at rigging both of these. Now, once again, please keep in mind that I'm trying to show you a lot of different options. You could absolutely do a three-layer finger on all of these fingers. You could do 4 fingers and a thumb rather than 3 fingers and a thumb. You could do a 2-layer thumb rather than a 3-layer thumb. I'm just trying to show you a lot of different options since there's no way I can show you every possible option and combination. But let's go ahead and get started with Q Hand Rig 1 here. And we're going to begin by building a structure for this hand. Now, Duick doesn't provide a sort of auto structure creator for the hand. It includes single hand and, in the case of animal, claw pieces as part of the arm script, but creating a multi-finger hand is something that you have to do manually. And that's where the custom structure button comes in. This is a very handy tool, especially for hands, but for anything else that doesn't fit into any of these categories here. And it works very easily. So let's go ahead and hit the custom button And you'll see that we have a set of simple options. We can choose the number of elements in the structure, and we can choose a base name for the structure. So the first thing we want to do is create a structure for the hand itself, for the palm. So let's change the number of elements to 1, and let's change the name to hand. And then go ahead and hit create. And it's simply going to create a single structure element here with 2 layers, the main layer hand, and then hand end, that little sort of button at the end of the structure. Now let's go ahead and fit this into place. We don't need to snap it to anything. We just want it to occupy a logical place to drive the main part of the hand or the palm. Now, an important note. If you are rigging a hand off of the end of an arm, this structure will be created as part of your arm structure. We're just creating it here for this single close-up hand. Okay, next let's create a structure for our 3-part thumb. So we're going to go back to custom. We're going to make the number of elements 3, and we're going to change the name to thumb. And once again, we'll hit create, and it's going to create a 3-layer structure for us, again with that 4th end layer. And now we're going to snap this into place. Just exactly the same procedure that we used with our arms. Let's do one more, and then I'll speed through the rest. So now we're going to create a 2-part structure for our index finger. So we're going to go custom, number of elements 2, index for index finger, and create. And again, we'll snap this into place. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and speed through the creation of these other 2 structures. Now that we've got our structures created, let's move them into position over their corresponding body parts and color code them to match. Once again, I'll speed through this since we've done this kind of thing plenty of times before. Now notice that the palm artwork is hiding some of the top parts of the structures here, but that's okay because we'll solo different pieces as we work with them. Now let's go ahead and parent this up. Now a quick note here, when we did our arm rigging, remember that we kind of added our IK and our controllers and things before we parented the artwork to the structures. But one of the great things about this whole structure system is that it actually doesn't really matter in what order you do that particular part, because the structure is what holds any rigging, if we add IK or if we add other types of rigging. And then the artwork is simply parented to that structure, either directly or through a bone attached to a puppet pin. So it's perfectly fine to go ahead and parent the artwork in before you add any additional rigging. It really doesn't matter either way. Now in this case, we're creating a fairly simple jointed rig, and we're actually not going to be adding any IK in this case, but we could if we wanted to. So let's go ahead and parent this all up, and then we'll add some very simple rigging to this very basic hand. So let's start by parenting together the structures themselves, which is really sort of the first step in actually rigging this up. So we're going to take the base of each finger, the index finger, the middle finger, the pinky, and the thumb, the base structures for each of those fingers. And those are all going to be parented to the end structure of the hand. Now those could technically be parented directly to the hand structure, but I like to keep a fairly strict hierarchy with my parenting. And the hand is at the base of this rig here, and then the end of the hand is parented to that. And remember, we can kind of think of the end of the hand as the knuckles. Then we have the base of the finger parented to that knuckle structure, and then the second finger structure parented to that first finger structure, and then the end parented to that second one. So we're going right down the line here. Hand, end of hand, top of the finger, bottom of the finger, end of the finger. So we're just keeping that parenting chain and that parenting hierarchy nice and clean and clear. Okay, let's go ahead and parent the artwork in there. So the palm to the hand, index finger 1 to index finger 2 to index 2, middle 1 to middle 2 to middle 2, pinky 1 to pinky 2 to pinky 2, thumb 1, 2, and 3, just as you'd expect, thumb 1, thumb 2, thumb 3. Now we can go ahead and turn our markers off. Let's go ahead and do that. And then let's go ahead and create a controller for our hand. So I'm going to select the hand structure, and we're going to go to the Create Controllers tab, and we're going to choose a rotation and position controller icon here. You can choose the hand icon if you wish, but I'm going to go ahead and do the rotation and position controller. We'll click that, and because we have that structure selected, creates the controller right at that same anchor point. Now let's go ahead and make this a little bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and make that 1500, and we're going to set the opacity at 25, and let's make the anchor point also 1500. And let's name our controller. I'm going to want to color code this as well. It's a left-hand element, so we'll make that purple as well as the icon itself. Now, once again, just remember, if we were building this rig off the end of an arm in a full body rig, we would either create the controller or the controller would be created for us when we rigged the arm. Also, whether we auto-rigged the arm or manually rigged the arm, when the IK was added to that rig, it would automatically parent the hand structure to the controller. In this case, we need to do that manually because we're not building this as part of a whole arm or a whole body. So we need to take this hand structure and parent that to our hand controller. As with all of our controllers, we want to zero that controller out so its position value is 0. Now this controller controls the rotation as well as the position of our whole hand here. Now for this very first mechanical rig, we're going to look at adding some very simple control to the fingers. And we're going to use the technique that we've already learned, creating the kind of mitten or flipper hands that we looked at the end of the first hand lesson. This is going to be utilizing exactly the same technique, just in a slightly more complex way. So remember, in those cases, we just had a single bend we were creating to kind of suggest fingers all grouped together at the end of the hand. Now remember that in the case of the jointed version, we just had the single piece of artwork parented directly to the end of the hand at the position of the knuckles, and then we simply added an angle control and tied the rotation of that structure to that angle control to control that kind of finger group at the end of the hand. And similarly, when we did the puppet tooled version, we added 2 puppet pins to the end of the hand and then parented those to the end of the hand structure and added the angle control and tied that in again. Now in this case, we actually have separate structures built for the fingers, and we just have a whole bunch of them rather than just a single sort of mitten finger or flipper finger suggesting the grouped together fingers. We now have individual fingers and individual structures for those fingers. But the rest of the procedure is exactly the same. So let's start with the thumb here and just see how this works. So I'm going to close up these other controller items here. And with the left hand controller selected, we're going to go under Effect, Expression Controls, Angle Control, and we're going to name that angle control left thumb 1. And then we can just duplicate that, Command D, twice to create 3 thumb angle controls. Lock our effects control window, and then just as we did before, but we're just doing more pieces this time, we're going to grab the rotation values for each of these thumb structures, and we're going to tie them with our property pick whip. Now remember, if you are not using CC 2018, you're going to need to option click and then use the pick whip here. But because we are using 2018, we just simply need to grab each one of these property pick whips, and the first thumb structure to thumb 1, second one to thumb 2, third one to thumb 3. And now each of these angle controls will now control this thumb. Now to complete this, we would just have to add 6 more angle controls for our 3 fingers, tie them in exactly the same way, and we would have control over all of our fingers, all from our left-hand controller here. Now, one of the good things about this kind of rig system is it's very simple to set up. It gives you really, really fine-tuned control over each finger, and it keeps all the controls for your fingers all on one single controller layer. The downside is that you're going to end up with a bunch of controllers. There'll be 9 in total for this particular arm, and that's a lot of controllers to have to manage. That's a lot of keyframes to have to manage. Now we can save some real estate here by closing up these little angle tabs so we just have the numeric value, and that would make it possible to fit all 9 in this window a little bit easier. That's still a lot of individual controls you have to manage for this type of FK forward kinematic rig. Before we move on, let's, as always, do our cleanup. And one of the things we're going to do here, just to make this a little more efficient, is bake the appearance of these structures, which we don't have to do if we use auto rigging systems. But because this is all manual, we want to make sure and include this step. So we're going to go back to create structures, and we're going to select all of the structures with the select structures button here. We're going to go to edit, and we're going to bake appearance. And what that's simply going to do is remove all the expressions and the effects to control the appearance of these structures, which we really don't need. And that will help improve the performance of the rig a little bit. In this case, too, we can go ahead and bake the appearance of the controller, since we're not going to adjust that later. As I mentioned, with a full body rig, I recommend waiting until you're at the end of the rigging process just to make sure there aren't some final adjustments you might want to make to the appearance of your controller. But in this case, we're pretty much done here. So we're going to go to Create Controllers, Edit, and again, bake that appearance. That'll remove those extra effect controls, and it'll take all the expressions off that drive those. So the whole thing works a little more smoothly and a little more efficiently. Now let's go through the rest of our cleanup steps. We can go back to Create Structures, select Structures, hide Structures. We're going to lock all of our layers except for the controller, and we're going to shy all of our layers except for the controller. Shy that away, and now we have our nice clean rig setup. Now I didn't bother to rig up the other 3 fingers since it's exactly the same procedure we used to rig up the thumb, and it would be pretty repetitive. But if you'd like to get the practice and just make sure you've got it solidified in your mind, you can go ahead and rig up the other fingers if you wish. Now let's move over to Q-Rig 2 and look at using IK for our fingers. Oops, I forgot to unlock my effects control window. I do that all the time. Let's go ahead and unlock that there. Now we've got 2 fingers already rigged up here, the pinky and the middle finger. And if I click and drag on these controllers here, you can see how our IK is working on our fingers. They're functioning just like the upper and lower arm of an IK arm rig. Difference is there isn't a quote-unquote hand piece off the end controlled by the rotation of the controller. There's nothing there, so it's just like the upper and the lower arm. Now, of course, the advantage of IK rigging is that it requires fewer keyframes. Rather than a rotation keyframe here and a rotation keyframe here, we just have a position keyframe on the click and drag controller. Now the disadvantage is that we will now have more controller layers rather than having all the control over the fingers on a single hand controller. And the other slight disadvantage is we don't have quite the fine-tuned control because the position of this joint is dependent on where the top of the finger is and where the controller position is. So we lose a small amount of control over that finger position and pose, but it's a pretty small difference. So just like with everything we're looking at here, there's no right or wrong. It's a question of the different advantages and disadvantages that these different options give you. So let's take a look at how we can set up this kind of IK system for our fingers here. So let's go ahead and unshy our layers, and let's turn the visibility on and solo just our index finger layers. We'll start with the index finger here. What we want to do is start by selecting the end of the index finger, and we're going to add a controller right at that point. And I'm going to choose one of these X and Y position only icons here. You can, once again, choose any icon you wish, but I like using the X and Y only because this particular controller is only about position. There's no rotation value here because there isn't an additional structure like there is on an arm where you have a hand at the end of it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that controller type. And let's go ahead and adjust its appearance a little bit here. We'll make it 600%. We'll make the anchor the same amount. We'll put the opacity at 25, just like we've done before. Now to create our IK, we're going to select the controller that we created. Then we're going to select the second and first structure layers for our index finger. We're going to go to links and constraints, and we can't use auto rigging now because we wanted to choose our own controller here. I really didn't want a hand controller at the end of my finger, right? So in this case, I wanted to choose my own controller, so we have to do this manually. So I'm going to go on the Auto Rig Options button here and click that, and we're going to go down to IK, and we're going to click IK. And now you can see we've got our 2-layer IK with our controller. We can go ahead and name our controller and color code it. And we want to parent the controller of the finger to our hand controller. And then once we've done that, we can go ahead and zero it out. Oh, and let's also turn off the draw guides here because I find that a little bit messy. And we also want to turn off auto stretching because this is a jointed rig, not a puppet tooled rig. And then we can go ahead and lock up and turn off the visibility of our structures again, and we'll go ahead and unsolo there. So now we've got our 3 fingers all rigged up really nice with those click and drag controllers. Now this kind of control works great for these simple 2-layer fingers, but our thumb has 3 layers. So we're going to need to do something kind of different for that thumb. And remember, of course, all of your fingers could be 3-layer fingers if you wanted them to. But in our case, we just have this 3-layer thumb, so let's take a look at a slightly different approach to rigging that thumb. So let's go ahead and turn the thumb structures on and solo them. And you'll notice as you look at these structures that it looks just like an arm. So we have the upper part of the thumb, the middle, and the bottom just like an upper arm, a lower arm, and a hand. So the easiest way to rig this is to rig it just like an arm. And again, you can do this kind of rig for all of your fingers if you want to. And I recommend it particularly in cases where your hand has to do something very, very intricate, like say a close-up on a hand playing a musical instrument or something like that. This kind of arm style rig works perfectly in that situation. So we're going to build this just like an arm rig. We just have to do it manually so we can select the icon. So we're going to select thumb 3, which would be like the hand. We're going to go to our controllers and we're going to choose the rotation and position controller. Now again, you can choose whatever control you want, but I'm going to choose the rotation and position because we'll use rotation to move the bottom part of the thumb, and of course position will move the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that, and then let's go ahead and make this a little bit larger, and we'll turn that opacity down again. We want to make sure the anchor is the same size. And then just like a manually rigged arm, we're going to select the controller, Then we're going to select the 3 layers we want included. And in an arm, it would be the upper arm, lower arm, and hand. In our case, it's the thumb, thumb 2, and thumb 3. Then we're going to go into auto rigging options, and we're going to go and add IK. Let's go ahead and turn off the display and turn off stretchy IK because we've got a jointed rig here. And we're going to name our controller. Color code it, and we're going to parent it to the hand and then zero it out just like all of our other controllers. Well, let's go ahead and unshy our layers here, and we can turn these structures back off again. And let's take a look at what we've got. This is a really nice control here. So with the rotation of the controller, we can control that little end of the thumb, and then of course we can pick up and move the rest of the thumb around with the position of this. Very, very nice, and a very fine-tuned control for a 3-layer thumb or finger. If you wanted to do this with a finger, you could do it with a finger as well. Now, we are going to run into a little problem here. So let's take a look at the problem, and then we'll talk about how to fix it. So here's the problem. Because of the nature of the way IK works, if I rotate this hand controller, look what happens with the thumb. Notice that the thumb starts to point downward. Now, it's not a huge big deal, but it's kind of a pain because you'd have to kind of counter key that in your animation to keep that thumb pointing the right way. And imagine if you had all your fingers rigged up that way. It would be a real pain to try to control that. But there's a way that we can solve this issue, and that's by using the orientation constraint, which basically allows you to parent just the rotation value of one layer to another. So let's go ahead and select our thumb controller here, and let's add our orientation constraint. Now we've got a variety of controls here for the constraint. The first one is to choose what layer our rotation is going to be constrained to. So constrained to, and of course we want this to the left hand. Now the weight is the amount of constraint. In other words, does it inherit 100% of the rotation value or less or more? Now in this case, if I pull this up, you'll notice that the thumb is still rotating at 100%. Now it's less than it would be at 0. So let's turn this down to 0, and you can see it rotates even more at 0. But at 100%, it's still rotating. So we need to double this. Now, I'm not going to try to claim to understand the math behind this. I've just done a little trial and error, and it works perfectly to double this. So if we put it at 200%, boom, now our thumb goes straight. And now, as I rotate this hand, the thumb doesn't move. I can still pose the thumb by rotating the controller just like I did before, but it's automatically inheriting and then doubling the rotation of the controller, keeping the thumb straight. So it's nice that Duick's constraint system offers us an easy fix for this little issue. Okay, as always, we want to finish cleaning up here, so let's go ahead and lock all of these layers and shy them back away. Oh, and one last quick note before we move on. I'm not going to take the time to bake the structures and the controllers here. I showed you how to do that in the first rig. You're welcome to go ahead and go through those steps if you like. Now, we've been working with jointed pieces here with this hand, but just like with arms, you can of course use the puppet tool as well, or combinations, just like we did with all the different arms. So let's take a look really quick at O hand rig here. And you can see we have a more textured hand here. And I've just rigged up one finger here to show you. But this finger has been rigged with the puppet tool. And you can see it works just as well. Now let's take just a little look under the hood here and just talk about a couple of small issues here. So we've got the same basic art setup. We have a separate palm and then separate fingers. We just don't have the fingers divided into two pieces. I don't recommend trying to have the fingers connected to the hand. If you recall us talking about how the puppet tool doesn't do a super good job of bending more than once or twice on a particular body part. So you certainly wouldn't want to try to have connected fingers and try to puppet tool the whole thing. So I still recommend dividing the fingers away from the palm or the main part of the hand, but then you can puppet tool the fingers themselves. So you can see we have a jointed overlap here where this index finger sits, and then we have the same 2-layer IK that we had on our other fingers on our Q hand, the jointed hand. And there's some nice things about this, like for example, when we bend this, it's kind of neat that the little wrinkles in the knuckle kind of stretch just like skin over bone. Even the pinching that the puppet tool does looks kind of natural. It's kind of what happens when the skin of the hand kind of flexes and bends. So it's really quite a natural look and has some nice advantages, particularly if you have a lot of textured or complicated artwork, which is of course always where the puppet tool is particularly useful. Now I've put starch on here so that I have a stiff upper and lower finger. Let's just take a super quick look at that here. So I'm going to select the index finger, hit the E key, hit the puppet, and we'll select our starch tool. And you can see that I've got starch all the way down to just before where the finger bends, and then starch starting after that. So just like we did with the arms, very, very similar to what we've done with the arms. We have, of course, 3 puppet pins, the top, middle, and the bottom. Those are, of course, turned into our 3 bones here. And then the bones are parented to the structure just the way you would expect. The index 1 bone is parented to the index structure, index 2 bone to index 2, and index 3 to the end of the index structure. So pretty logical there. If you're interested in practicing a little bit, you could go ahead and do a puppet tool rig on these other fingers. And with the thumb, you could either do just 3 pins or you could do 4 pins and set it up like an arm like we did in rig 2. Okay, let's shy these away again, and let's move on to Q rig 3 here, Q hand rig 3. Now sometimes you don't need such incredibly fine-tuned control over a hand. Sometimes you only need a hand to do 1 or 2 really simple things. In that case, I'm going to show you a really great use for the wonderful connector tool to create a very simple hand rig. Now this is going to be a little more basic in terms of the connector. Our first experience with the connector was creating those replacement rigs, which it's very good at, but that's sort of a very specific application for the connector. This is a little more of a general look at kind of just what it does on its basic level. And the cool thing about this type of rig is it doesn't require any IK, doesn't require adding a bunch of angle controls or anything like that. It's a very simple and straightforward kind of rig to set up. It's limited in terms of what it can do, but it's a good option for simple situations. It'll also be a good way for you to kind of see the basics of the connector. So let's go ahead and unshy our layers, and let's take a look at what we have here. We have our basic hand set up. We've already got our structures in place, and I'm just going to go ahead and unlock these here. Oops, I probably shouldn't unlock the 0 null. I'm just going to do a Command A to select all, and then I'm going to hit the U key. And notice that what I have, rather than IK controllers or angle controls, I've actually created a sequence of animation directly on the structure layers. And this animation works this way. At frame 10 here, we're at frame 10, our hand is in our neutral position. If I scroll down, let's deselect here, if I scroll down to 0, the hand clenches into a fist. And if I scrub up to 20, the hand kind of spreads out. So I've got neutral in the middle, and then closed, and then open at frame 20. Now it's very significant that I have these keyframes equidistant from one another. That's an important part of this process in order to make the kind of rig we're going to make work. So we've got exactly 10 frames between each keyframe, so that right in the middle is our neutral. That's super, super important. So let's use the connector and set up our control. So I'm going to grab the left-hand controller here, and we're going to go under Effect, Expression Controls, and we're going to add a slider control. And we're going to call the slider control L for left, open, close. Now we also want to adjust the slider range here. So I'm going to right-click, go to Edit Value, and we're going to change the slider range. Instead of 0 to 100, we're going to change it to -100 to 100. That means that 0, our neutral, is right in the middle, just like our neutral pose is right in the middle of our animation. Now we're going to go to the left hand, hit the E key to open all of the effects controls. We're going to tab open that slider, and I'm going to select the word slider, just like we did for the replacement rig. Now we're going to go under links and constraints, and we're going to go to the connector, and we're going to choose that slider as our master property. Now, just like we did on the slider itself, here in the connector, we're going to make our minimum value minus 100 and our maximum value, the default, of 100. Now we need to select the children. And in this case, what we mean by children are all of these keyframes on all of these layers. Those are our children that we want this slider to drive. Once we have all those selected, rather than connect to opacities, that's what we used for the replacement rig, now we're just going to use the standard command, connect to properties. That will then link with expressions this animation to our slider. So now as we slide the slider down, the hand closes. As we slide the slider up, the hand opens. Really cool and really simple. Now we're still really just scratching the surface of what's possible with the connector, but you can see how powerful this is when you can have any amount of animation on any number of layers, as complicated as you want, tied to any property, either a property on a layer that is being animated or something like a controller, like a slider. It doesn't matter. So there's lots and lots and lots of possibilities here. Now obviously this rig is limited to some degree, but it's very simple to set up, very quick and easy, and if you don't need anything real fancy, it's a great way to go. Let's slide that slider up to the top of our effects control window there, because it's, again, what we'll probably use more than any of these others. And let's go ahead and clean up here. I'm going to select all these layers, hit the R key a couple times to close all those up. We'll lock all these again and shy those layers away. Now, all through this lesson, we've been looking at these giant close-up hands. And as I said at the beginning of the lesson, keep in mind that you can create these rigs within a full-body rig. So I've got a couple of quick examples of that here to show you. So let's go to the A Farmer Man rig here, and you'll see that we've got his arm rigged up. Now, I did that because with the finger control we have, we want to be able to kind of really see what the fingers are doing, and having this big icon sitting over the top of the hand would make it really hard to see. And this is an option you have if you find these icons a little bit intrusive onto your character. So just really quick, note that I did that by using the position value here. The position value allows you to offset the icon from its anchor point. Note the anchor point stays in the same place. And I've changed the orientation to 90 degrees. So I've got it sort of like a teacup handle, like the handle of a coffee cup or a teacup. And I can still pick up and move that arm, but I'm not actually right over the hand itself. Now, when I rotate this controller, it rotates the whole hand and moves all the fingers, but I've also got individual finger control. So I can also pose each finger. Now these are just one layer fingers, so they don't have any joints in them. They just kind of position somewhat crudely like this. But it still gives you some nice expressive capability with this simple graphic character. And this was set up exactly the way our first rig was set up. So let's take just a quick peek under the hood here. And you can see that we have individual structures for the 3 fingers, and each finger layer's rotation value is attached with an expression to the angle controls here on our controller. Just like we did that first rig. Very, very simple. Now again, these could be 2 or 3 layer fingers and have more angle controls, however you'd want to set this up. Oh, and now that I look at this here, we should probably move these up above the controller settings there. That's probably a good thing to do. Probably should have done that on the first rig too. But we'll kind of readdress all this stuff when we get to our very, very final checklist and cleanup steps at the very end of the process. So no big deal, but you do kind of want to always be thinking in terms of that UI design, what's going to be the most efficient for the animator, even if the animator is you. So a really nice, simple control, easy to set up, with a lot of possibilities for fun poses. Next, we have the F orange woman here. Let's go to her really quick. Now, she has tiny, tiny little hands. So let's zoom in on her hand a little bit here. And I'm going to turn the resolution up just a little so you can see exactly what's happening here. So once again, we have kind of the teacup handle kind of style, again, because her hand is so little. And in this case, we have little IK controls on each of her fingers. So when I pick up and I move the hand around, it moves all of those controllers as well, moving her fingers. And of course, I can rotate her hand. But then I can also pose each one of the fingers with these little click and drag controls. So we have a lot of possibilities for control here. Oh, and of course, remember, you can also reverse the IK if you want to kind of change the direction of the pose. And all of that is animatable. So a really nice level of control. Very, very organic. And also notice that in this case, I'm not using any starch on my puppet tooled arm or my puppet tooled fingers because she's got this lovely painterly look to her here. And so having just a nice soft bend is extremely appropriate in this case because it just looks like we're bending this paintbrush stroke around, which is really, really kind of neat. So once again, a very nice organic control for this character. It has the downside of having a lot of additional click and drag controls. If you imagine adding another 4 controls for this hand, that really beefs up the number of controllers you have on the screen, but it's also a really wonderful, intuitive way to pose this character. So this was set up just like the O hand rig with the 2-part puppet tooled finger and IK. And it's just simply built into this larger full body rig. So just like with the arm rigging, my goal here has been to show you a lot of options. And just like with the arms, there's no right or wrong answer. There's pros and cons and different looks and different effects and things that work better with some kinds of artwork or create more or less range of motion, all that kind of stuff. So learning all the options you have available to you is really important so that as you approach each rigging situation, you can choose the option that's right for you. Remember that the replacement rigging is going to work great for you in many, many cases. But some of these mechanical rigs can be really cool too, and are particularly good for close-up hands or situations where you need really expressive, fine finger motion. Okay, now that we've covered arms and hands pretty well, we're ready to move on to other parts of the body. So next, we're going to look at legs and feet. I'll see you then.